into where you get into some kind of perfectionist syndrome. Like,
Yeah.
I'm the leader, I got to be perfect, I got to hit these numbers, and
Yeah.
I'm going to get there by all means necessary. So throughout your career, can you talk a little bit about when you coach some leaders in regards to their perfectionist syndrome and the vibe or the environment that it was creating around them and their teams?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad that you brought this question up. So that's part of the reason I actually started the Academy of Professional Engagement, is because in reality, I remember being a really, really bad leader, right? And I didn't know that I was a bad leader until after I was out of that specific role, and I did some self-reflection and got really clear on the things that I did right and also the things that I did wrong. But there was this sense of perfectionism that I had to have, or felt like I had to have at the time. And like, in an effort just to create some clarity around the definition behind perfectionism, when I say perfectionism in this particular context, it is the irrational need for flawlessness and a persistent sense of dissatisfaction, even when you've achieved a specific goal, right? And so to like break that down in like simple terms, it's that, you have this unrealistic goal, you hit the goal, and you still don't think that you did good enough. And you always feel like you are in a position where you have to be perfect, right? You have to say the right thing. You have to show up in the right way. You have to wear a certain type of clothes. You have to make sure that you inspire your team at all times, and that you have to have all the answers, right? And the reality is this happens a lot with new leaders, especially when they're in those first big jobs and they think they have to like know everything about everything and have all the answers to every single question. I remember my first time leading a team, I actually led a group of more experienced professionals, and I literally was handcuffing my team because I felt like I had to have not only the strategy, but the answers. And so at some point, someone had to come to me and be like, Phil, you do know that we know how to do this work, right? Sometimes your job is just to get us the resources
Absolutely.
and give me your perspective in all of this, right? I think the second type of leader, or well, there's three types of leaders when I think about perfectionism from a perspective of leadership, right? And the first is just like that self-focused leader. And that's the perfectionism that is focused on you performing as high as you possibly can at all times, right? And again, I keep saying that there's a balance, right? It's important for you to have a drive to be able to get really great results, but it's also really important for you to have a balance to know that if you do not perform at the highest level, but you still get the results, that is good. And you should ultimately create this environment of like incremental, continuous improvement instead of every time I go out, I'm knocking it out the park, right? The second type of group, though, is actually like the environmental pressure for perfectionism. And that usually comes from a leader that you are following that creates an environment where you feel like you always have to show up as perfect in that specific environment, right? And the reason that this can be scary and this can be like harmful to an organization is because poop rolls downhill. So usually if you are
Absolutely.
if you are with a specific type of leader that is putting the pressure on you to be perfect, right? You ultimately will be putting the pressure on your team to be perfect. And so now your team feels like they can't make mistakes or be innovative, or feels just the daily stress of this pursuit of perfection without actually like room to make mistakes, or even to have fun inside of the work that they do every day, right? But where that actually comes from, that like environmental pressure actually comes from this idea that you are not good enough if you are not performing at a high level, right? And so you internalize the outcomes of the work that sometimes you may not even have control over said outcome. And there are opportunities where you can be as good as you can be and still not get the outcome that you ultimately were looking for. And so this environmental pressure, perfectionism is really a an idea that I would encourage people to start to look inside and figure out not only where is the pressure coming from, but also why do you feel this specific type of reaction to the pressure that is coming from the outside? Because there's always going to be external factors that have an impact on your performance, but it's important for you to be able to acknowledge what those things are and look at them as information and not always as fact.